around and waited around the corner, and all of a sudden the screen door flew back and it went whack, and a bag came flying out of the door. And she went and told my grandpa. It was one of the times my dad didn't actually get a spanking for being naughty, because my grandpa couldn't stop laughing long enough to give him his whipping. So I am what I am. You know, genetics, it's a powerful thing. You remember the stories about Mabel. You remember the dying Catholic, the constipated squirrel. Do you remember how his glasses got lower and lower the noisier we got, until finally he, took them off? It works on children too. And once I got old enough to just need reading glasses so they can sit on my nose and all I have to do is tilt my head down. Oh, it was very handy. My mother was more quiet. She pointed out she was more behind the scenes, but she was always, always, always busy. At Camp Erdman, the faculty wives worked in the kitchen. That is where I learned that if you clean the kitchen sink out well enough, maybe I shouldn't tell you this. They made the potato salad in the sink. And my mother would stir it with her hand in the thing, these big sinks, up to her elbow in potato salad. She washed her hands first. The men were out there organizing games and doing stuff, but the women who didn't get quite so many laughs, those women worked really hard. I was generally out watching the guys play, but whatever, my mother was a very hard worker. She was an organizer and a workhorse. And I would like for you to know, come here, Winona. This one right here, Tina, is my mother. As long as Tina is alive, my mother will never truly be dead. Because Tina is so organizing that I think she could organize my mother.
Why is she not up here?
Because we're showing solidarity. We never work as hard in our lives as when she's the boss of the project. Like, can we sit down and rest? No, here, do this, do this.
Well, I work just as hard, but I only get about a tenth of what she does done.
And I often wonder, okay, I'm done with you now. I often wonder if my mother would be flattered. Nobody would ever get any rest if it was the two of them together. If my mother would be flattered, or she would feel kind of like a greyhound with a chihuahua nipping at her heels. Like, would you quit telling me what to do? I don't know. But fortunately, it's not only naughtiness that comes through in the genetics. Now, my dad's name, I think he got it when he was about 12. They named him Lightning, because he was so slow. And he never got any faster. He liked to stay up late all night, sleep in the morning. My mother was a farm girl. She got up before the sun came up to milk cows. And so she was always ready, dressed, in the car, honking the horn. He was in there really carefully putting on his shaving cream so that he could get every single whisker on his face. He was always lightning. You remember, I remember how very, very careful and how methodical he was. He was always meticulous. He washed his hands, he chewed his food meticulously. Even in dying, he experienced pretty much every possible permutation of the process on the way to the end. And as I was doing this, I called up my girls. I said, do you realize that your grandma and grandpa died how they lived? My mother had dementia, but she was up and functional. She went to church on Sabbath. She had a stroke on Sunday. She was dead by Wednesday night at midnight. Boom. She did it. So it was very quick. My dad took 10 years of extremely painful, painstaking difficulty for him. And I had never realized until I was getting this ready that the forecast of their death was in their work styles throughout all the life that I knew them. I just figure it's a good thing on the resurrection morning God's going to get them up at the same time, because if he let my mother up first, she'd be on the cloud trying to borrow a horn from the angel. And would you hurry it up? And he would be checking his pockets to make sure he had everything going. Marie, just a minute. My dad, just for an example, was kicked out of hospice 4 times. Because when you enter into hospice, you have a time frame. It's generally for people.
It's the only time he failed in his life that I know of.
There's a time frame. You're expected to die within 6 months. And he didn't do that 4 separate times. So when he finally died, he was not in hospice because I just was afraid, even as a registered nurse, I was afraid to call up and say, we'd like to have you back, because they mocked me. They
In a good way.
yes, they were our friends. They were really close to us over and over. And when my dad didn't have an easy death, except at the very end. Fortunately, somewhere along the line, he lost his awareness of what was going on. He didn't enjoy it up until then. But he didn't have an easy time, and because the 3 of us took care of him in some home or another until he died, we were all a part of it. And it got to the point where the illness and the deterioration was pretty much all I could remember. And I asked the hospice nurse, I said, Judy, am I ever going to get my dad back again? Am I going to get my memories, or is this going to be all I ever remember? And she said, Susan, don't worry, it will come back. And it came back before the funeral when Tina and I were making the original slideshow. And I looked at the pictures and I remembered who he was and what he was and what he did and what it was like to be his daughter. And I don't really remember that much about him dying. I remember it was hard. They would remember more. The blessing of a bad memory, don't knock it. But in the slideshow, we recaptured a great deal of what we had lost in the process of his dying. Surprisingly enough, I got a lot of spankings when I was a kid. One of them that I remember very early on, we went to visit the home of some nice Japanese family. And the mother said to my father, I don't know why they took me on this visit, maybe nobody wanted to babysit. She said, Mr. Day, my daughter says you are just the most wonderful teacher she's ever had. And I said, you ought to see what he's like at home. That's why I was always walking, because I couldn't sit. And okay, you remember it, and let me just say thank you. Nobody's ever thanked me for my sacrifice before. There was whining involved. I don't want to take credit for that. But I didn't know that everybody else didn't live that way. What can I say? It was just how we did things. There were lots of people in my house, and they came and went, and I stayed. Because nobody would take me. They did make mistakes. They were very human people. But they were wonderful and kind. And as an adult, I realized how very much I should have been admiring him, but I was just being naughty. What can I say? Too soon old, too late smart. That's just the way it goes. And the text that comes to my mind when I think about my mother and father is from Revelation 14:13, and it says, And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. And we're their works. We learn things from them that we have taught to the people that we worked with, to our own children. And as long as this work keeps on going in the lives of people all over the world who remember them and love them, then their works follow them. And they have a legacy in the living that will last as long as the world does. I'm glad to be a part of it. I'm glad you folks were a part of it. And I hope as you see the slideshow that it helps you remember when we were young and had dark hair and no wrinkles, and a lot of us were thinner. And those were good days. And Hawaiian Mission Academy was a great place, and we learned good things. And I wouldn't trade those difficult years of growing up for anything in the world. Hawaii was lovely. The people are wonderful. My parents loved you, and they loved this place. And I hope to see them again someday and tell them, I'm really sorry. That's what I'm going to tell him. You can say thank you. I don't know. He may not have as much to apologize for. Now, in the slideshow, at the very end, there's going to be a little bit. I'm just going to tell you about it because she made it so it keeps moving, and I can't talk during it. It wouldn't have been a day funeral without humor, and it was a day funeral. What happened, her husband had a work truck, an enclosed work truck, and trailer. They took his coffin and him back to Wisconsin. They picked him up from the funeral home, and they drove all night to get there. And my husband and I and you, we came the next morning. We started out a little later. And so we got there a little more than 12 hours before the funeral. We had to bring our program with us.
There was always a flat tire beside the road in the thunderstorm too. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's why you started early. We brought the guest of honor, we brought everything that was necessary. And when we got up to the farming community, there had been some flooding, and the bridge was out between the big city and the farming community. The big city is where the mortuary is. Well, all the people that lived in Belleville knew about it. Apparently nobody told the mortuary man, who was extraordinarily nice. He was friends with my cousin, and my cousin says, be good to them. And so when it was time to go to the funeral, we followed behind the hearse, and he didn't know about the bridge out. The people who knew about the bridge out, the local people, took the bypass to start out with. And what he did is he drove, and we had this funeral procession going down to the place where it says bridge out, at which point he turned into a farmyard, turned around and backtracked, and those of us that were following him backtracked. Everybody else is already at the grave, and they're like, where are they? So my dad was late to his own funeral. And my mother used to tell him, Kenneth Day, you're going to be late to your own funeral. And he was. I was like shocked that he was late to his own funeral. You said my father was a very spiritual man. He was very consistent in his beliefs. And Adventists believe, you would have learned it in Elder Osha's Bible class, that when you're dead, you sleep. And you don't go anywhere, you just go in the grave. That's what my dad believed. He died believing that. Well, the funeral home director, pulling out all the stops for his cousin, his friends, his cousins, friend's cousin, thank you. One of those things. They have the balloon ceremony, the balloon release. And he had memorized, which I didn't memorize it just for us, but he had memorized a really nice poem about releasing the balloons and the soul rises to heaven. Well, you know what? It's not going to destroy anybody's faith to hear something different. And I've always thought it was kind of cool to let a balloon loose, and I'd never gotten a chance to. So I'm thinking, okay, this is fine. And so we all moved off to this little place a little bit away from the grave, and he starts reciting the poem, and all the family members are standing there with their balloons. Absolute stillness in the cemetery. And as we released the balloons, a wind came, and it blew most of his balloons into a tree, and they stuck and wouldn't go up. I'm like, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, you can't make me do that. And it was a month or more after the funeral that we found out that her oldest son had taken a video of it, where you can hear us behaving badly. I'm sorry. He's probably thinking everybody else likes the poem. What's wrong with these people? But it's just, the balloons go up, a few of them blow past, but they go up in the tree and you can see them and the little strings are dangling down. And it happened just as the balloons were released. It was a really fun funeral, except for the part that somebody was dead. So, at the very end of the slideshow, that's what those things are. So, go ahead. There's lights on it. before is going out to dinner, right? So I'm not gonna feel bad if you miss the food. All right, we can take care. You and Andy and anybody else that wants to, I know you guys have to go. Fine. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'd like to say something before we all leave. We really enjoyed Mr. Day. He was such a fun person. He made learning fun, a role model for many of us who became teachers in our class. And your mom was a special person too. God bless your family. Thank you for doing this.
And Susan, just want to make sure someone says thank you for Woga.
Thank you. Even tempered with the memory of the plastic brush that none of you ever met. I was still in a different grade. I used to look in the mirror and say, you poor baby, you. So it was a little different. All I did was take off the glasses and use in principal goggles. So thank you. I have enjoyed having you. I've enjoyed remembering. And it was just, we were great when we were young, weren't we? What can I say? Okay.